It's just been like a crazy few weeks. I mean, that's all there is to say. Really quick before this video, I just want to say thank you. Everyone, I've got like 1,000 subscribers now, which is really cool. I didn't think I'd hit that mark based on the last few years of doing this, so I'm pretty excited. It's got me kind of reinvigorated. But man, it's been a busy couple of weeks. I got a couple of new ideas I'm going to be trying here, and I've also been working on my podcast a lot. But before I talk about that, I'll talk more about that at the end. We're going to talk about the Canon R6. This video is not sponsored. I got this camera to try through my Canon Professional Services membership. I pay about 500 bucks a year for that service. And part of that is you can demo equipment. And I use that a few times a year, maybe, usually with some video equipment. I own a lot of photo equipment, so there's not much for me to demo. But I did ask to try this R6. I bought the R5, which is down here too, but the R6 was the one I got to demo. First off, let me start by saying this camera is not intended for me, meaning that I am not the target demographic of this camera. I'm a full-time professional photographer and filmmaker. I work in advertising, news, sports, entertainment. I do a wide array of stuff. But this camera is not really aimed at me. This camera is aimed at students, younger photographers that are learning, hobbyists, kind of high-end amateurs, stuff like that. Maybe as a good backup camera, but I'm not the target demographic. To give a little more history, this is the R6, which is kind of intended to imply that it is the R version of the 6D. The 6D was always a more stripped down version of the 5D, still maintaining a full frame sensor, which this has, but being a little more basic. It's always kind of had a little more basic autofocus and a little bit slower and things like that. That was what the 6D and the 6D Mark II had versus the 5D Mark III and the 5D Mark IV. This review is strictly photography. I wanted to say that very clearly because everyone seems to comment about the video features on my videos, and I ain't talking video, I'm talking photo. So for those of you who like photo stuff, give this a thumbs up. This camera is very similar to the R5, which is a phenomenal camera. But this is a mirrorless camera with a full frame sensor. It still has a flip out LCD screen, has the exact same autofocus system as the R5, the exact same frame rate as the R5. It has virtually every single still photography feature that the R5 has, minus just a few. It doesn't have a 3-pin connector up front in the front of the body for like a wire or a pocket wizard. It still does have a trigger. It's just a little like micro audio one, just a little bit different. This camera doesn't have CF Express. It's going to be dual SD cards only. Lastly, the one that really affects me is this does not have voice tagging. Voice tagging seems like a pretty subtle thing, but for me as a sports photographer, I use voice tagging a lot. And basically what voice tagging is you can hold down the rate button and record a voice memo that is attached to your photo file, and then inside a program like Photo Mechanic, you can play that back. And that's really useful for making captions in photojournalism. It's really great in sports because you can identify who a player is that might not be that legible through the photograph. That happens a lot in sports photography. Or you can say like what happened, like, hey, this was a touchdown pass, or hey, this guy was celebrating after making a sack against the quarterback, or whatever. Just little notes like that you can do while you're shooting. So for me, that was a pretty big hit, but I know for most people that's probably not that big of a deal. So the big thing you're going to see between the R6 and the R5 is no top screen. The R6 does not have a top screen like the R5 does. So right here on the R5, we can see that top screen. The R6 does not have that. That's probably the biggest thing people are going to see when they pick up this camera is we go back to this little dial here instead of having that top screen to display things. To some, maybe that's a really big deal. I honestly don't use that top screen a ton. It is nice to have, but I think it's just that for me, a nice to have. Other than that top screen not being there, there wasn't a lot of huge differences I felt day to day using the camera. That's not to say that there isn't differences. It's just ones that didn't affect me as I use the camera day to day. I've had this camera about a month and I've done a lot of things with it. I've shot professional sports, I shot college football, I shot news assignments with it, I shot portraits with it. I've done just about everything you can with this little camera. And to be honest, it's awesome. I mean, that's the basic of this that's the basis of this review, is that this camera is very impressive. It's $2,500, which is not cheap, but for a full frame camera, that's kind of what you expect to pay. 20 megapixels is a little bit lower than the R5, but realistically very usable if you're not cropping a ton. Personally, I don't crop a ton, but for me doing professional work, I kind of need that higher resolution, honestly. So for me, it's kind of nice to have that R5 resolution. But for photojournalism, weddings, hobbyists, stuff like that, and especially students, that's not really that big of a deal to only have 20 megapixels. That's actually like totally adequate. But day-to-day use, I didn't notice any of these differences between this and the R5. I found this camera to be completely adequate. And again, this has the exact same autofocus system, the exact same speed. All those things that really matter in a camera are exactly the same. And traditionally, that's not been the case. Traditionally, a 6D is always like super neutered compared to like the 5D. You have a worse autofocus system, you have a lower resolution, slower camera, whatever. Like that's always been the trend, like 5D 360, 5D 460 Mark II. Now it's like R5, R6. Like they are very similar in pretty much every feature minus that resolution. Again, video features are different. I'm not talking about video features today, and I know a lot of people looking at this camera aren't shopping for it as a video camera. If you saw my settings video, I went over all the settings and things to set up this camera. And I think, I haven't really changed much from that. I found the camera super easy to use. It's just a nice overall experience. As far as picture quality goes, I haven't done any super pixel peeping on the noise and dynamic range of this camera versus the R5. But I will say that like when you pull the two files up in Lightroom, they look pretty much the same, meaning that the dynamic range, the image quality overall is extremely similar. Until I zoom in, I don't really notice that much of a difference. In fact, one game I shot with it, I was positive I had the R5 out for pregame, and then I went and looked later that day and I was like, oh, I guess I shot the pregame with the R6. So it looks really similar. Great colors, great files, they look awesome. They of course open in Lightroom Classic or whatever, like the newest versions of those softwares with the subscription, so they work great. I hadn't have any issues there. And of course they work in Photomechanic 6. I actually had someone ask me this and we found out that you do need Photomechanic 6 to see the raw files on this, not Photomechanic 5. It's a super niche thing, but just wanted to say it since I remember. All the things that I would worry about on a prosumer camera, which I put in quotes, is not there. I think this camera is completely adequate for most people. The real deciding factors here is whether or not you need 20 or 45 megapixels is going to be the biggest deciding factor between this and the R5. Now I know someone's going to hit me up in the comments and be like, Brett, how'd you not know that this camera doesn't have XYZ feature? And I'm probably missing something, I will be honest. But I will just say that like as far as picking the two up, those are the things I notice. Those are the biggest deciding factors for me. Voice tagging would rule this camera out for me immediately. I use voice tagging constantly. That was my biggest pet peeve about the 5Ds, is they never had it. So I had a lot of 1Ds when I really didn't need like a third 1D because I didn't want to not have voice tagging. And that sounds super dorky, but again, it's something I use every day in my workflow. I use it on news assignments, I use it in sports, I use it in all kinds of stuff. It's just part of my editing world. So who should buy this camera? Well, number one, this is probably the best student camera I've ever played with. This has no limitations that I can find for a college student, or anyone learning photography, that is. The elephant in the room here is this camera does 12 frames per second, meaning that you can viably shoot sports and action with this camera. That's something I've never been able to say about any full frame Canon camera except for the 1DX series. Now mind you, that's a mechanical 12 frames per second, so that's a mechanical shutter. It's not electronic shutter. I haven't really used the electronic shutter. I don't really plan to use the electronic shutter in these cameras. For those of you that are wondering, well, how loud is the camera? You must need to use mechanical. Here, or you must need to use electronic. Here is what the mechanical shutter sounds like. I'm looking at my audio levels, it's so quiet. So the point being that I don't use the electronic shutter in this or the R5. This camera though is super impressive. And being that you can shoot action with it, it might be the perfect camera to learn photography on. And now I know there's tons of options out there and there's a million reasons why you'd pick anything, but this gives you full frame sensor, works with the EF lenses, fantastic. For anyone wondering about that, the little EF adapter works amazing on this and the R5. I don't notice a difference at all between the R5, R6, and the 1DX Mark III. You can use a huge host of lenses. You have the new lenses available to you. You have video features where you can learn video on that are pretty viable. Again, I know it's not a video camera. I know it's not an R5. I know it's not an A7S III, but you can still learn video on this camera. In addition to all that, you can actually shoot action. I mean, you can shoot action on this camera. You can shoot sports on this camera, no problem. This is a no-brainer. For college students, just go buy this camera. I think this is the best college camera you could get, or anyone learning photography. I mean, this is a great camera to learn photography on, which is really, really exciting. And you can naturally just hop into the next R whenever that comes, either the R5 now or a year or 2 or 3 from now. There's probably going to be a new one that'll be great. And by then you'll kind of have figured out, like, am I more of an action photographer? Am I like fashion or advertising? Am I doing video more? Like, you can start on this and go anywhere and kind of have all of those doors open. It used to be like, oh, go get a 7D Mark II that's terrible for everything other than sports, but it's the only one that did 12 frames per second that was cheap. As far as like wildlife photographers go, this camera's a great option if you're starting out. I totally want the 45 megapixels of the R5 personally, but I could see that that's probably overkill for a lot of people too. The animal eye tracking on this is pretty amazing. I shot some birds with the R5 or the R6, I can't remember. They work the same, so and it tracked these little hummingbirds and stuff on these bird feeders like super well. It's on my Instagram somewhere, but really impressive. For professional photographers, this would be a great backup, or if you're not into the R system yet, maybe this is a great way to try it out and kind of see the possibilities, and then in a year or two, kind of invest in something different. Personally, I think it's more than adequate for professional work. It's just, again, with that limitation of the 20 megapixels. There's a couple little features here and there that are probably worth getting the R5 for, but if you're doing photojournalism for a newspaper or news organizations, 20 megapixels is plenty. I mean, that's more than I had for a large chunk of my career. I was always shooting on like an 18 megapixel or 60 megapixel 1Ds or whatever. So to have 20 with 12 frames per second is really usable. I really love these R series cameras. I'm very impressed. I didn't expect to be impressed by them, actually. I'm a big Canon person. I like Canon products. I have shot Canon for almost 10 years now, or actually for 10 years now, I think. With that being said, I really am not a mirrorless person. I don't like mirrorless cameras generally, and I'm really impressed by these. I'm trying to think of other things I've had come up with these. There's no negatives. It's only been surprises in a positive way, which is really awesome. But I think like what's amazing is that the fact that this camera even holds up in my professional workflow is saying a lot. I mean, that's a ton to say, because I'm usually shooting with 1DX Mark IIIs, and before that 1DX Mark IIs. It's not like I'm using old gear here. It's like I'm literally picking up 1DX Mark IIIs, and then I'm picking up the R5 and the R6, and they work. And that's saying a lot, because I think a lot of camera systems, you can't just hop in a 1/3 the cost camera and have it work. And that might be the biggest testament to the R6, is the fact that I can use it. And if someone said tomorrow, like, hey, your 1DX Mark IIIs are gone, or your R5 is gone, and you got to go work, give me this. I'd happily use it. I literally used it on assignments for the New York Times, Getty Images, AP, some personal work. I've taken them all over, and the photos have been published, and they're awesome. So the fact that I can take this camera out and work for national news clients and commercial clients is saying a lot about a little $2,500 camera. And I don't think I could have said that about the 6D. I mean, I think I would have been pretty hamstrung by the autofocus on a 6D. Maybe 6D Mark II is a little different, but so to have a prosumer camera, like you can get this at Best Buy right now, I think, and I can use it in professional workflow is really exciting. With that being said, thank you so much for subscribing and liking, and thanks everybody who left Tesla comments on the settings video. That made me laugh so hard. I don't know how these videos get received. I don't know how I come off on video, but know that like I have a little bit of fun doing this. It's a lot of work setting everything up and editing them and doing all that stuff. But it is getting more and more fun, and it's more fun when you guys interact and leave stuff for me to talk about. Go follow me on Instagram. I'm over there at Brett in Real Life. That's still my username. I don't like it, but it's the one I got. But yeah, check this out. If you have questions about this camera, leave them in the comments below or hit me up on Instagram. I gotta send this one back. Canon has been nagging me, and I've been dragging my feet. But it is really impressive. That's the end of this video, will be the fact that this is a really impressive camera. I'm really surprised by it. I didn't expect to be surprised by either of these cameras, the R5 or the R6. And I've had days where I literally just take these cameras instead of the 1DX Mark IIIs. I literally shot a New York Times assignment last week with this camera, and it was great. It worked perfectly, which is saying a lot for a little prosumer camera. But anyways, thanks so much for watching. Please give a subscribe if you can. Give it a like and a follow. And I'll have to figure out something new to have you guys comment on the next video. I'm not feeling creative. I gotta be at an assignment in 25 minutes, so I gotta go. So thanks for watching, guys.